Good evening. This country is being urged to take in more refugees, so should we? We'll discuss that tonight, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening, great to have your company tonight. Should we take in more refugees? That shortly, but first. An article attacking white privilege appeared in the weekend paper. It started by saying middle-aged white men might be sick of being cast as villains, but a report suggests they should check their privilege. The article details a Human Rights Commission report revealing gender and racial inequality in the workplace. Young ethnic women are at the bottom of the heap, it says, with the median pay of just $14.75 an hour, on par with the minimum wage. Older white men earn more. The article says European men aged 45 to 64 earn nearly double the income of young women from minority groups. Now, you can't argue with the facts, and gender inequality needs serious addressing in this country. But to suggest those with white skin need to check their privilege, in my view, is misguided. For those unfamiliar with the white privilege term, it's a term used to describe societal privileges that benefit white people beyond what is commonly experienced by non-white people under the same political circumstances. In other words, it's become the latest excuse to blame and make the middle white class folk guilty. White privilege is a racist concept being used to divide people. There's no question that Māori and Pacific Islanders are overrepresented in the wrong statistics, and New Zealand needs to do better. A recent UN report on New Zealand's human rights paints a worrying trend. We know this. However, the UN and the Human Rights Commission are both addressing these issues with Turning the Tide programs, a police partnership with iwi. However, is throwing more cash at iwi groups the answer? Well, last year, the Prime Minister claims Māori are better off under national with more Treaty of Waitangi settlements compared to Labour, really. But what checks are in place to ensure the millions and millions of settlement money actually goes to struggling communities who really need it? Success starts with education and strong leadership in communities. The victim mentality played out all too often by the politicians is counterproductive and does nothing to encourage young non-white New Zealanders to succeed. The author of that article was probably just stirring the pot by questioning white privilege. He should be encouraging personal responsibility if he wants to mend racial tensions, in my view. The message is all too clear, and it's become if you can't look after your kids, if you decide to take drugs, then it's not your fault, it's society's problem. And if that really is the case, what's the incentive to better yourself if you're surrounded by a world hell-bent on destroying you? Community leaders should be encouraging self-empowerment, telling young people they can succeed if they work hard and educate themselves. Now, let's be clear about this. This does not mean forgetting the Treaty of Waitangi or New Zealand's history. No, it does not. It's more about encouraging a progressive and integrative society based on personal responsibility. Now, I've been attacked by the far left for my previous stance on social welfare issues. Apparently, food vouchers and education on healthy choices at supermarkets was an attack on the poor due to my privileged background. The far left is supposed to believe in diversity, though, which, in my view, should also include diversity of opinion. Instead, they often choose to demonise people with different thoughts than their own with petty personal attacks in a bid to shut down the conversation. Now, that's just wrong. If we're serious about equality, then pointing the finger at perceived privilege won't change anything. Only looking at the underlying issues will. And that's this week's Memo to Christchurch. Now to this evening's main topic. Well, there are nearly 60 million displaced people in the world. Of those, nearly 20 million are officially recognised as refugees. New Zealand takes about 750 of them every year. But is New Zealand doing enough for refugees around the world? The government is under growing intense pressure to increase New Zealand's refugee quota of 750 a year, which has not changed since 1987. Even Winston Peters reckons we could do more. Aid agencies and the Race Relations Commission have called for more people to be allowed to settle in this country. So should we increase that number we take in? Well, Patrick O'Connor is the director of PITO, the Multicultural Learning Centre in Christchurch, and is an advisor on the Refugee Council, and he's with me tonight. And good evening to you.
Good evening, Chris.
Nice to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for your time. First of all, can I get you to respond to my opinion piece? Do you think we could be doing more to encourage people as opposed to blaming those who are perceived to be successful? Where am I going wrong here?
Well, I think just a couple of points. I'm not an expert in the gender inequality business, of course, but I think, and I suppose as a male, I've got to have some expertise as a white male. But I think the idea for me is always that people with ability and credentials and skills, demonstrable ones, can be rewarded, whoever they may be. And if white males are demonstrating that expertise and that ability, then they should be rewarded. There is an interesting comment, an interesting concept, a Greek one, funnily enough. Talking about Greek things today is not perhaps the greatest thing we should be focusing on. But there's a Greek concept called pleonexia, which is the idea that some people take more than is their fair share. And so in that sense, I disagree with the notion that very wealthy, very high-performing CEOs should now be earning 4.2 million, for example, or a figure like that.
Oh, I agree with
the
you
lowest people in the company, for example, telecom or somebody, should be earning $50,000. I think that gap is
that's obscene.
That's pleonexia, you know, that notion.
Well, it's not just that, it's all about this notion of benchmarking, isn't it? Then if the CEO down the road is earning this amount of money, I should get that. It should be based on your performance and your skill, not this notion of benchmarking, which evidently is created by the public relations and human relations of us in the first place. But let's get to the heart of why you're here tonight.
Sure.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not this country should take in more refugees. And for the benefit of the folks at home, can you just explain to me your long association with migrant workers and refugees in this country?
Fine. Well, I'm an ESOL teacher, a teacher of English for speakers of other languages. And I've travelled a lot and spent a lot of my younger years living in all sorts of countries and teaching and living overseas and working with ethnic minorities and travelling. For example, I spent some years in Africa and travelled from one end of Africa to the other in a Land Rover, got to know all of the Africa continent. It was wonderful, and I've worked in Greece and France and London with refugees in London. So had a big background in that way, and then came back to New Zealand. I'm a Christchurch guy, and started teaching here, ESOL. And I've done lots of other jobs as well, so I think I'm...
Do you think your global perspective and being able to travel around the world has enabled you to perhaps have more of a sympathetic outlook to what the plight of refugees around the world experience every day?
Definitely. I've been in some tricky situations myself in other countries, and where the host society in that country looked after me, you know, just difficult times, and with second language situations. So being a teacher and being interested in that all my life, that sort of thing about other ethnicities and other cultures, led me to want to set up a school here, which I did 25 years ago.
I want to discuss more about the school you've set up and some of the tricky situations you've been in, but also very important to discuss how you believe New Zealand is relating to those countries where refugees come from. That's next. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the program. My guest tonight is Patrick O'Connor. He's the director of PITO, the Multicultural Learning Centre in Christchurch, and is an advisor for the Refugee Council. Well, let's get to the heart of the issue now, Patrick. How would you describe New Zealand's relationship with some of the international countries where we receive many of our refugees?
Well, we don't have official relationships with many of them because they're countries that we traditionally haven't had much to do with. For example, Somalia, Ethiopia, Kurdistan, Bhutan, Nepal, these countries. Afghanistan we have had a bit to do with. And these are the biggest numbers of refugees we've currently got and we've had. Our relationship with these countries on an official international UN kind of way and international rights and things like this is very good. New Zealand have got a good reputation in these countries, although many of the refugees, until they've been informed that they're coming to New Zealand as their refugee destination, have not heard of New Zealand often. So many people have not heard of us, don't know much about our country. And the other countries are Canada and Australia and the UK and the USA and these countries. So they haven't heard of us necessarily. But we have got a very good reputation for helping those most in need. Some countries cherry pick their refugees. They try and take the best or the cream of the crop, if you like. New Zealand has... In
a way that defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Well, it does.
It defeats the goodwill that's supposed to be in place.
It does, and the New Zealand government argument and in our sector, our argument is that we should accept people, those most in need, because they are the ones who need refuge. Many people, as you've said, 20 million or 50 million, the figures vary, need refuge in another country, but surely the most in need should be given the preference.
Let's talk about some of those refugees of recent months, in fact. You know, those who have been in such awful situations trying to get to Australia, the boat, they tell them to turn around, or in some awful cases the boat sinks. To me that suggests they must be in such awful situations to take their life in their own hands and their family to leave that country and hope they can travel, you know, in some cases thousands of kilometres on rough seas to get to a destination they know nothing about.
Well, they're desperate people, and just a little anecdote. I mean, my great-great-great-grandfather was told by his father in Ireland to go and get a boat to New Zealand because there were 11 children and they couldn't handle 11 children during the potato famine and during the English occupation. So this young fellow was told to get a boat to New Zealand. 15 years of age, they wouldn't accept him, he wasn't 16. He came back, told his father that, and his father said, go back tomorrow and tell him you're 16 and don't be coming back. Now that was an example of, in my case, an Irish refugee coming out here. So these people, those people were desperate, my family in those days. These people are absolutely desperate. Persecution, religious persecution, clan and tribal warfare, famine, all sorts of border invasion by other countries, etc., etc. So they've, you know, the Hazara people have been persecuted in Afghanistan for so long. They're just desperate to go. They can't get ahead. So they flee.
Does it make you sad or frustrated? I almost feel embarrassed saying this, but I asked the question on my Facebook page tonight, is do you support the idea of increasing the quota for refugees? You know what's coming, don't you? They all said no. Now, I know you're not here tonight to sell the reason why they should, but does that annoy you? Do you think we should be doing more? Why?
Yes, I do. I do, because our ability as a country to welcome people and look after people is greater than many countries in the Western world, if you like, or countries able to have people. We've had 750, as you said a while ago, for so long. We at one stage...
Is that since 1987?
Yeah.
It hasn't changed since then?
Well, at one stage we did have 800 for a short period, but Helen Clark and Leanne Dalzell, the Minister of Immigration then, and Helen Clark, the Prime Minister, reduced it to accommodate the then Kosovo refugees. And we thought it was going back up to 800, but it didn't. And the argument then by the government was that if we increased our quality of resettlement, if we looked after refugees a bit better, then it would go back up to 800. But whatever the argument is, we believe in the sector that we are providing very good resettlement, and it does annoy me that a country as wealthy relatively as New Zealand, and with such a good volunteer base. Volunteers are very important, and this is Volunteer Week. Volunteers in our sector have been absolutely fabulous, and they should be acknowledged. But we have got a good volunteer base. We have got good qualified NGOs like my one and many others that exist throughout the country. So I think we can easily go up, and the United Nations have been requesting of successive New Zealand governments for many years to increase our quota, and I think it should go up to 1,000 minimum.
You know what they say, You know, you hear all the time, let's look at our own backyard first, we're too small a country, they bring the crime, all that sort of stuff. But you're suggesting that we actually do have the facilities already, we have the wraparound support in this country to increase that figure by a lot more. If that's the case, then why don't we do it?
Well, I believe that we should look after the people in our own country, of course. I do not believe that a refugee should come in and receive services at the expense of anybody in New Zealand. One thing you did say there, Chris, that I disagree with, and that is they bring the crime. They don't bring the crime. Refugees...
That's the myth busting.
It is the myth. Refugees, though, as a group, are very, very low in terms of their crime, the crime they commit in New Zealand. It's insignificant. And we should, again, look at our own people committing crime. But no, I believe that we need to organise ourselves as a nation to accommodate these people, but of course accommodate the disadvantaged people in our own country as well. And we can do it. Do
you think sometimes we take for granted our geographical isolation? So perhaps there's a mindset, I put it to you, that perhaps some New Zealanders think, well, we're at the bottom of the ocean, or the world rather, we don't want anything to do with it, we're our own little country, so be it. Do you think that's too simplistic in a world where we are increasingly seen on the global scale as something more than just the blip at the end of the ocean?
I think we do. I think we've got to understand that places like Turkey today, Zambia a few years ago, 37,000 refugees at one stage. It's already one of the poorest nations on earth. Turkey today has over 1 million refugees. So we in New Zealand do have that mindset that we're way down the bottom of the world. But if Australia, if refugees were pouring in from Australia or Samoa or Tuvalu or somewhere like that, we'd be accommodating them, right? They'd just be arriving. And if we had a border, a land border, next to a country in deep trouble, we'd be accepting thousands and thousands, tens of thousands.
Well, we wouldn't have that choice, if you call it a choice.
We wouldn't have a choice.
I need to take a break. Patrick O'Connor is the director of the PITO, the Multicultural Learning Centre here in Christchurch. When we come back, do you think we will increase the quota, and why? Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Patrick O'Connor, the Director of PITO, the Multicultural Learning Centre in Christchurch, and Advisor for Refugee Council as well. Let's discuss this quota. The Prime Minister said, no, we don't want to increase what we've got at the moment, and he said, and I quote, increasing the number of refugees New Zealand takes each year will degrade the quality of service on offer for those lucky enough to be accepted. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. I think that, budgets just need to find money. And so I don't think it will degrade the quality of what we do at all. We just simply have to increase the resources and hence the quality. I think that we should see refugees not as a burden, but as an asset.
How do we turn that perception around, Patrick?
It's a big challenge because, we have a degree of inherent racism towards people of other cultures, particularly second language people and people of other colours and cultures and languages. But I think we've got to educate New Zealand, and I think the host society needs to become more aware of the joys of a multicultural city. In a country, Christchurch now has 170 ethnicities amongst us here. When I was a young fellow in Christchurch, we had 4 or 5. Now, many New Zealanders who have travelled overseas and things love the diversity of the Londons and of Europe and everywhere else. When we come back here, we've got to also appreciate that in our own backyard and get to know people, understand cultural diversity and the asset that it can be for our city in many, many ways.
Are we getting better, do you think? I mean, it's easy to say Christchurch is a pretty white city, isn't it? And it still really is. It's pretty much Anglo-Saxon, and it is conservative by nature, isn't it?
Well, I think interestingly...
Apart from the fact that you've just told me but you know what I mean?
Well,
the perception is there. Is that still a reality, do you think?
I think it's gone a wee bit, Chris. I think we used to be viewed as a monocultural backwater. I now think we're a genuine multi-ethnic city on a journey to multiculturalism. Got a long way to go. But look, about 60 refugee children from Somalia have attained degrees at New Zealand universities in the last 3 or 4 years. Fantastic, they're really motivated. The Afghani community, very highly employed in Christchurch. Ethiopians, very highly employed. Lovely.
I'm glad you're saying this, because I was going to point to, before we leave the program tonight, a bit of a myth-busting session. I think we've covered some of them. But are there any myths that you want to bust tonight? Because, you know, on Facebook, oh, you know, we'll look after our own people first, or, you know, we're too small a country, blah, blah, blah. What are some of the myths out there, and I think you've named a few tonight, that you think is important to let the people of Christchurch know about?
Well, I think the people of Christchurch need to know that refugees and migrants don't commit crime disproportionately. They don't. They are highly motivated to get educated. People are really taking advantage of education and training programs. They're really well employed at the moment in the rebuild. There are Afghani building companies, for example, out there going for it. And I think language, people are motivated to learn about language in our society here. So they really are trying to be New Zealanders, if you like. And I think it's a myth that they're a drain on our society and they're on the unemployment benefit forever. They're not at all. They're out there motivated to get work and to try their very, very best.
Do you think the rise of organisations, terror organisations like ISIS, has made your job difficult in getting the message across they're not all terrorists?
I think it has, Chris. You know, most Muslims in the world can't stand what's happening with these terrorist groups overseas at the moment. I was at the mosque today for a funeral, the Christchurch Mosque in Deans Avenue. Yep.
Really welcoming people.
Fantastically, and all the people I was talking to there were just so discouraged by what's happening internationally, saying things like, this is not Islam, this is not in the Quran. We are peace-loving people, we don't believe to that, we don't subscribe in that sort of behaviour. So I think those are the kinds of things that when we see a Muslim walking down the street, we don't need to assume that somehow they're involved in these terrible acts. They're not at all. They want peace and harmony and love and friendship, just like we do.
And conversely, you've also got refugees as a direct result of the atrocities from ISIS in a way, don't we?
That's right. All over that part of the world now, there's refugees just fleeing left, right and centre because of the very atrocities that these groups are performing. So we have to look beyond that, and I think we have to also look beyond the sexy trappings of diversity, you know, and we can go and enjoy a Somali dance or an Afghani kebab or something, but we have to, as a host society, really understand the depth of culture that people bring as well. Beautiful aspects of culture that they've got to share with us. And we can learn from them about their treatment of elders, for example. Most societies have a very, very advanced understanding of treatment of elders compared, may I say, to our own society.
When it comes to integration, what goes on there? And is that a tough time for you and the organisations you've worked with to try and ensure that there's enough wraparound support to ensure refugees are integrating into what some would claim to be New Zealand society, whatever that is?
Well, I do believe you've raised the word integration. Integration is so important, and it shouldn't be assimilation. Assimilation should go to the dustbin, you know, consigned to the dustbin. We want to integrate people in a positive way so we're all learning from each other. It's not just our culture and you come. We've got to go halfway to understand other cultures as well.
Sounds fair to me.
In the way that people do with us when we're travelling in France or somewhere else.
Really enjoyed speaking with you tonight, Patrick. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much,
Hope you come
Chris,
back.
and all the best with your program.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Patrick O'Connor, everybody, the Director of PITO, the Multicultural Learning Centre right here in Christchurch. And that is our program. Don't forget to join me on News Talk ZB tomorrow, Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell. It's going to be a big show, plenty to discuss when it comes to the rate increases and the asset sales. But from me and all of us here at CTV, good night.